During the meeting, please make sure that you announce yourself by name and title every time you speak so the public that is participating knows who is speaking. This is critical given the number of remote participants and current guidance from the Kansas Attorney General. Please be sure you are speaking into a microphone to ensure your comments are heard and an accurate record is made. I'll call the meeting to order, special session. I'll ask the clerk to please call roll.
Good evening. You are hereby notified that I have called a special session of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas, to be conducted in a hybrid format on Thursday, February 29th, 2024 at 5 p.m. regarding an update on capital improvement projects. Immediately following will be an executive session in the fifth floor conference room regarding litigation. Roll call. Burns,
Here.
Ramirez, Hill,
Here.
Kane, Lopez,
Here.
Stites,
Here.
Davis,
Here.
Bynum, here, Townsend,
Here.
Burrows.
Here. Thank you, committee. Tonight, we'll hear an update on our capital improvement projects. And immediately following the update, we will adjourn to an executive session. So I'll ask our county administrator, Mr. David Johnson, if he has any opening remarks.
As always, at the start of our budget process, we give you an overview of what we envision being included at the final recommendation in the budget. And I will call, who's presenting? Jeff, there he is,
Yes, sir.
to lead this discussion. So, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you and good evening. Much of this presentation is going to be very familiar to several of you that have been through this several times. We also did meet with the new commissioners last week and ran through this briefly. As you know, this is a key part of any city's financial plan. It's a short-term 5-year capital improvement program, describes the major investments in the community over the next 5 years. Before we get started, I'm going to introduce Reggie Lindsay, that everybody knows, the budget director, and Tanner Stark is our new asset manager, and he's going to play a part in this, and just encourage you to be nice to him since it's his first time, but he's going to do a great job. So 5-year capital improvement program, I would say most, if not all cities have some form of this. And, the process is supposed to include the Planning Commission, which we have visited with the Planning Commission already. There will be another session with them as we work with the elected body on the capital improvement program. So we work closely with planning and budget, public works to develop this. And then there are several people in the room that are important to implementing the CIP here to support this. I'm gonna hand it over to Reggie real quick, so he can highlight the process ahead of us.
Earlier this week, we kicked off our 2024 to 2029 CIP process. And what we'll be doing in that process is going through and allowing departments to submit their capital improvement projects and also equipment. It'll be about a 3 to 4 month process. So this is kind of where we kicked it off right here. And we'll move through all 3 phases of our budget process. So we have the department budget and development process, and then we have a consolidation and preparation. Within this part, consolidation and preparation, we will bring after, what we'll do is work the capital improvement process internally, where we'll have departments, the county administrator office, and then also we'll have internal core groups, which are internal committees that'll help make decisions on capital improvement projects. So after we go through that process in phase 2, we'll bring a completed CIP back to the commission in May here. And then we'll get you all's input to see what projects we have in there. If there's something you're looking for that that did not make it in there. Also, once we go through that with you all and do an analysis on it, we'd also take it to our planning commission. So it'll go to our planning commission 2 times, and that'll happen in the months of August and July. And then we'll bring it back, capital improvement plan, in our final proposed budget document that, David Johnston will present, on August the 8th. Next slide, please. So we'll just kind of break down, an overview of CIP. So CIP is defined as anything with a useful life of 5 years. Also has a total estimate cost of $50,000, and they include projects that include construction, reconstruction, rehabilitation, and maintenance of capital assets. And then also includes equipment. So all the vehicles and everything that we have going around the city include fire apparatus, sheriff vehicles, street vehicles, and also police vehicles are included in the equipment. Just kind of give you an idea of the numbers for dollar amounts for CIP. It's $95 million are what we're spending on CIP in our 2024 budget currently. So that's about 21% of our $467 million budget. To further break that down, $81 million of it is projects, and then $13 million of it consists of equipment. I'll turn it back over to our Public Works Director, Jeff Fisher.
Thanks, Reggie. I want to say Reggie and his team over the last 3 or 4 years has really done a lot of work to improve our process for developing the CIP. They've done some excellent work. We really appreciate them. So as we've talked about before, we've worked hard to build an objective, data-driven process that's also builds in transparency. I think that has worked well. It is a work in progress each year. We continue to look for ways to improve this. We know as of a few weeks ago, the county administrator shared 4 priorities for the organization to operate from: infrastructure, economic development, fiscal sustainability, and communications, customer service. So we're thinking about those things now as we work through these processes. That's really helpful to us. We know also that we've always talked about, as much as we want to be data-driven and objective about how the organization invests in infrastructure and assets, there's also a human element in developing it and in the elected bodies' decision-making process. And that's important. Also, how the public engages in the process. You might recall the UG has developed this interactive map that's out there for the public. And so goes a long ways to building transparency. They can get in there and take a look at what work is going on, what's happened in the past, what's going forward. And then also citizens can actually get in here and request a project be considered. So we believe that's really helped building trust in the community and transparency. I know I'm missing something here, but I can't remember. Tanner, being the asset manager, is going to remind you kind of the scoring and ranking of the process, how we've done that. Before he gets started, a little story. A few years ago, I was invited to an event at one of the churches in the Northeast, and the discussion was about the historic redlining and the generational impacts as a result of that. And so I walked away thinking, okay, in our CIP, is there things we can do to recognize that past and ensure that there's equity in the investment throughout the city? And so I asked the team to explore that, and they've been working on it for about a year. And we had some really talented folks working on that. They made a presentation to the Planning Commission a few weeks ago about this. We've abbreviated that for the purposes of this discussion and solicit some feedback from the elected body on that. I'm going to let Tanner take it from there.
Right. Thank you, Jeff. And as he mentioned, I'm just kind of jumping on board here late in the game, but I'll do my best to convey the spirit of the project and keep moving it forward. So really, we have a couple of visions here. Back at the end of 22, the commission's mission statement was to have an equitable, healthy, and prosperous future. Additionally, here from Plan KCEK, you can see there's an aim to transcend a legacy of inequity and disinvestment in the past to realize an accessible, regenerative, and healthy future. And in Public Works, we take pride in having a culture of continuous improvement. So in that spirit, we wanted to make sure that our CIP aligned with those visions. So first, we'll start by just taking a quick examination of the legacy of inequity. So there on the bottom right, we have a table of lane miles per resident, which is inordinately high. And there's a lot of factors there, but on the left, we kind of touch on because of post-World War II federal housing policies, white flight, there was incentivized westward suburban sprawl. So you've got way more lane miles and less total residents. So you're gonna have a higher cost of service for a similar level of service. And really, you'd probably expect to see that in the sewer collections network as well. In a similar vein, on the left side, you have a map of historically redlined areas in Kansas City, Kansas. And on the right side, you have a map from the HEAT project. And that was a study that was done a few years back. I think it's Health Equity Action Transformation. And they identified 19 criteria that were good social determinants of health. And so that's mapped out there on that index. And it's not hard to look at the correlation and see how they relate. And so that also plays into that legacy of disinvestment and inequity. So one of the first tasks our group undertook over the course of the year was just to examine existing criteria, reevaluate them, make sure they were, reasonable. Something that stood out to me that I hadn't thought about before was, we have a criteria for commerce. So something that is in an area that serves commerce is going to score highly, but you also have areas, for instance, there in the bottom, there's a map of areas that are more than 1 mile from a grocery store. So if you're in that area and you're not close to commerce or a grocery store, then you're going to score low on commerce. So it's definitely something to think about. This is kind of a more broad overview of our criteria as they exist right now. You'll see the criteria in yellow on the right are the criteria that were changed in 2022 weight-wise. So master plans and safety increased in the weight for the scoring. Community sites and capacity needs were, they declined slightly. And so part of the project, we also explored the idea of a new criteria altogether, perhaps an equity-based criteria. And with that being the case, just bear in mind, if we go that direction, you would have to come up with a reasonable weight for that you would score it. And then you'd have to adjust the other weights as well so that they continue to add up to 100 to fit into our formula. And actually, so the map on the top left and the bottom right, that's from the Justice 40 initiative. And so the Justice 40 initiative stipulates that 40% of certain federal investments have to go to areas of disadvantage. And so we actually use that mapping from the federal government on some of our grant applications, I believe. So that would be an example of a good tool you could use in something like an equity category. In the bottom left, I included an urban heat index map from CAPA, which was done a couple years ago, I think, for both Johnson County and Wyandotte County. And that's something I think that could also maybe play into that. So to sum up the work that we did over the last year, we reflected on current methodologies to avoid inequitable practices. We came up with ideas to improve the methodology for scoring the master plan criterion. And we explored the possibility of adding a brand new equity-based criterion for the CIP. And my predecessors put together a much bigger, more thorough deep dive into the subject. So if it's something that interests you and you want to take a closer look, follow that link there. And like I said, it's just much more comprehensive.
Thank you, Tanner. So the point of that is to share with you that Public Works, Planning, Budget, we're looking into these matters, and we got some feedback from the Planning Commission, and any feedback we get from the elected body tonight, we'll go back and explore this further, hone in on things that we believe will be beneficial to the decision-making process, and present those findings at a later time, even if it's this fall, because we definitely want to, if we find things that we believe we want to build in, like new criteria, that we want to test it I also believe Tanner wants to test the existing criteria based on latest information, latest data. So again, it's a work in progress. We're going to continue to build on that. I also want to remind the elected body, we have the outcomes and strategies document that the elected body put a lot of time into, and then adopted a resolution. The spirit of that was to revisit that annually, measure progress, update it if needed, in the budget process. And so we're always ready to do that. I know most of you are familiar with the highlights of that, so I won't go through that in great detail. And so we hope that the improvements that we continue to make to the CIP process build in objectivity, data-driven approach, and transparency. And that will always be staff's goals in the CIP process, along with just making sure you have an informed decision-making process. That's all we have. Thank you.
Commission, any comments, questions? Now would be the time to ask them. Commissioner Bynum.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation and the new look at how we go about doing our business. I would first ask that if you haven't shared the outcomes document with the new commissioners, that we make sure that they have that document. And I have some kind of nuts and bolts questions. The first one is to your last page, really, if you don't mind answering some questions about where we are with some of these really big projects that your department is tasked with tackling, starting with the two bridges.
Certainly.
If you don't mind just giving us those updates real quick. One is a grant application in the hands of the federal government, and the other one is a grant that is going to be submitted, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. We actually have 3 different grant
Okay.
Efforts. Kansas Avenue Bridge that we know we were not awarded in this last grant cycle through the mega grant. We are pursuing that again. I believe the application will probably be due by May or June, like it was last year. Casey Mo's partnership on that is important, and we'll continue to attempt to garner that support. So we'll make that application again this year. Central Avenue Bridge, we're pursuing the RAISE grant. That is preceded by a planning grant. I think we submitted that last week or early this week. And so we'll go through a planning exercise. It will also include some design, and if awarded, that would put us in a very good position for construction monies later. And then we also have another program, I think it's called the BIP, that we're putting an application in for, that would help us with a fairly large package of smaller structures. And considering how far we are behind in our sort of overall bridge program, if we were successful with all 3 of those, it'd be huge for this community going forward.
My second question is, going back to the project map, we know that we have prior year projects that were planned for but didn't occur. So were they budgeted for, and is that money being held? Maybe Reggie can help. You know, you have neighborhoods, for example, where we had said in 2021 or 2022, we're going to do a grind and overlay of this entire neighborhood. But the project didn't happen. And we budgeted for it, I assume. And so are we holding that funding within that year's budget, but we will eventually, you know, how does that impact the projects that we say we want to get done this year, when we clearly have like a backlog of prior year pavement improvement projects that didn't get completed?
So it depends on if it's a debted project or if it's a cash project. So if it's cash project and it hasn't been spent, there is the option for us to move that funding forward, but it is something that we look at. Sometimes all of them don't move forward if there's if it's a cash project. And then if it's a debt project, it kind of depends on the authorization and what year it was in. And if we decide we want to authorize that debt. So we are in a process now of looking at like projects that might not have been completed in 2022. What will be the fate of those projects as far as if they'll move forward or if the debt will be authorized on
Right.
them?
And then if you don't mind, our county engineer is ready to jump in.
Troy Shaw, County Engineer. So we've had this conversation with budget, and I'll speak specifically to the mill and overlays because that's an annual, it happens every year. It's easy to talk about it through that lens. So historically, our practice was we get the money, let's say in 2021, right? It's obligated in January. We didn't spend it, or we didn't obligate it even until the end of the year, because we tried to bid projects at the end of the year, because then you get better prices if you bid them over the winter and contractors are ready to go around the next year. So historically, our mill and overlays have always been a year behind when the funding was obligated. So this past year, we've started to, from direction from commission and budget, it's like, no, we need those spent and obligated the year that they're let out. So we've started trying to get those back, and you'll see us get caught up this year. We've actually bid the project out for last year, and we're getting ready to bid the one for this year coming up already. So we're trying to get that. We're catching up on previous practices. We're changing them as we go. So there's a couple year lag. So the year that our project was called the 2021 mill and overlay usually didn't happen until 22 or 23, just because of when we bid it versus when the budget was obligated. So you'll start to see that change this year and next year too.
Okay, and so are you, a couple things. Because one of my questions was kind of from a practical standpoint, should there be a year of catch up? You know, catching up on the projects, but it sounds like you're saying,
So all the funds that were dedicated for the projects that they're dedicated for from a mill and overlay perspective are going to get done. They are getting done.
okay,
That money is still there. And actually Reggie just worked with Reggie's budget team to help us get that money rolled over quickly this year, so that, and they did a great job helping us with that, so that we could bid the new project out now and get that caught up this year is the goal.
great.
So it'll still be lagging because we're slowly catching up, but I would say by next year we should be bidding next year, 25 project. It should be ready to go the minute spring rolls around of 25 to start construction.
Are the prices stabilizing at all, or is everything just continuing to go up?
It's better. I mean, it's still high, but it's not going up another 25% again. We're seeing them at least level off finally. So.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Committee, anybody else? Commissioner Townsend?
Thank you, Pro Tem. Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you for the update. I want to make sure I leave here with a clear perspective about what all this meant. What I'm hearing is that as a result of putting this project together, or in the process of putting it together, certain historical shames, for lack of a better term, were factored into when and how certain infrastructure will be done. Is that correct?
That's what we're exploring.
Okay,
We haven't landed on anything just yet.
okay. I'll share this, and I'm glad to hear that that's a focus, because Sunday after church, and I went west to one of my churches way out on about 85th and Parallel. And the point of going there was so I could conduct pothole patrol from all the way there to 5th and Parallel. And so, not to catch you off guard, you'll get an email where I detail. I must say, there weren't that many potholes as you would expect. But I would say, and I pay particular interest to say about Schlegel, so 62nd on. Couldn't find a lot of potholes, but that ride was being like inside the tumbler of a washing machine. So there's just a need, from what I experienced Sunday, all the way to really by Heathwood Park and a little beyond, that's around 10th 8th and 10th and parallel, just to get that stretch repaved. I've gotten a lot of calls, and I just went Sunday for the express purpose of doing pothole patrol and all this. So if this direction will help speed that up, that's what I'm trying to find out. And so I can tell my constituents, this is when 42nd to 60th is going to be paved, or this is when,
Sure.
9th to 10th and parallel is going to be paved.
Right, based on the way we've been operating very recently is just data driven, conditions only, right? And regarding street preservation. And we know about 8 years out, 6 to 8 years out, what streets need to be hit or prioritized, right? This might inform that a little bit differently or might influence that a little bit differently. We don't know yet. I don't know how it would influence the street preservation versus whether we do another Leavenworth Road type project versus Quindaro. Don't know that yet. What we do want to know is, are there criteria that we can build into this that would influence the process to address any inequities or disparities and where the UG's been investing and will invest in the future? That makes sense.
It does. It's a starting point. So like I said, I'll give you the details, and maybe we can look at factoring this in. It also impacts economic development, who comes, who doesn't want to come, who wants to live here, who doesn't. And then maybe we can focus on a project like Leavenworth Road, getting money to do that strip. So, but I think this is looking at a lot of things that had not been considered before. So I'm appreciative of that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add one more thing on potholes. We've talked about this before. Each year, the volume of potholes increases. We were at, I'll just say 28,000 or 18,000, I don't remember exactly. But then this year, we almost went 10,000 more potholes or something like that. So each year that the PCI falls, especially coming out of winter, the more potholes we're going to see. And so fortunately, you all supported getting the 2 pothole patchers 4 or 5 years ago, and now we got a new spray patcher in this last year, and those are going to be extremely helpful to addressing the potholes in a timely manner. But as the potholes increase each year because the PCI is falling, we're going to have to increase maintenance dollars to keep up with the potholes until the street preservation program catches up, if that makes sense.
Well, it does. And I want to be clear that I thought there had been a good job done in that stretch that I named, because I started out like 85. I was really concentrating like 60th on back. And so most of the potholes had been addressed. There are only, I'm not going to say a number. I'll rely on my notes.
Mhm.
But it was really the quality of the street. Some just plainly just need to be paved over. Wasn't a pothole there, but it was a bumpy ride. But no, I want to commend Public Works for getting out and getting on it. I didn't find that many, but the condition of the streets left a whole lot to be desired that my constituents have been coming to me about. And I will say, I recall being on the committee under the previous administration that looked at our infrastructure. And I think the number that I recall is about 18 million needed just to keep up with where we were, not improve the PCI. So I'm very aware of that as well. And remember that. Let me see who else is around here. Commissioner Bynum, I recall, was on it. I don't know. I think maybe Commissioner Davis as well, but that was very insightful. So I'm aware of that. I commend Public Works for what it has done. We got to do a whole lot more, try to figure out how to do a whole lot more, especially on that main thoroughfare. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Davis.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Excellent presentation. I'm actually really excited. When we talk about using Justice 40 census tracts and kind of this tool that our federal government has, released for investment in projects, I think it would be great for us to parlay that with whatever applications we are putting, right? If righting historical wrongs and historical disinvestment is a goal of our federal government, then we should probably align that with our application efforts. And so I'm literally excited for what we could create because it can really change the game for our capital investment. On that, have you all done any research on how other cities or other municipalities capture equity when it comes to capital and maintenance and improvement?
I know if, if you go to the link there on one of those slides where it says full presentation, that group had done a much deeper dive and they definitely looked across at least 10 to 20 other communities to observe what they were doing right now. So that might be a good starting point.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, David was helping me out here. Awesome. That's exciting. I'm excited about it. I absolutely think we should take into consideration, and just for the public's awareness, when our federal government chose not to invest, particularly in the northeast end of town of Wyandotte County, it has a ripple effect over time, right? If you do not invest in a particular area and you see depopulation, you do not have the tax base to support the infrastructure and the amenities around that area, right? And we have seen, particularly in the land bank, and I know many of us are here that serve on the land bank, the standing committee, where we are looking at areas in neighborhoods where it's desolate and we aren't seeing as many single family homes and density that's needed to support this infrastructure. So I invite you all's creativity as we discuss it. Regarding streets and potholes, yes and amen to everything Commissioner Townsend has said. I have heard a lot of people ask me about it, and my response is, how much are we talking, right? And how much are we willing to pay? Because none of this is getting any cheaper. Do we have a number of what we would need to invest? I heard $18 million, but I don't know if that's adjusted for 2024. Is there a number to reach that 25% increase to get to the desired PCI?
I believe, Troy, correct me if I'm wrong, we need to be north of 25 million a year.
And then how much are we doing right
Change that
now?
trajectory we're on. I'm sorry.
How much right now are we investing?
I think for the entire program, it's roughly around 10 million. And what we did and what we'll put in the budget this year when we go through is another 25% increase, because we discussed that, I think 2 years ago, we started that. So we'll add another 25%, and we can get you the numbers on that. The numbers are from 2 years ago when we did it, but we could add inflation and see what it would turn into. But when we ran those, it was 25% a year for X number of years to get us to the PCI score of an average of 65 by, I think it was like 2045 or something. I'd have to go look at the numbers exactly, but yeah, it's 25% a year is what we're on right now.
Gotcha.
This year we'll put in another 25%.
Okay, so it's kind of an incremental step to getting there, because that is quite a jump to get there. Regarding facilities, I'm of the opinion that we just own too much. I mean, we all just had our presentation with our appraiser regarding what is happening, and we have a lot of nonprofits. We have a lot of land bank properties and UG-owned properties. None of them are generating revenue to support the work that y'all need to do. So I'm of the mindset of, how do we creatively dispose of UG-owned property responsibly and equitably to ensure that we can start to change that ratio? I sat on the subcommittee for facilities and parks, and we talked about the Amoresco study. Where are we regarding that work, and how is that going to influence the current CMIP?
Ask John Kelly, our facilities director.
Good evening, Commissioners. We are still working on that, Commissioner, with Amoresco. We have some funding this year for them to take more of a deeper dive, but we are looking at some of the square footage in like City Hall, for example, the courthouse and some of our other larger structures to talk about removing some of the outlines, smaller buildings to reduce that square foot space. But we are continuing to look at that. Parks are another one. Some of the parks we're looking at and the rec centers, if we're talking about making a state-of-the-art bigger rec center. So there are things that we're still working on, but we don't have anything at this point that's, solid that we're talking about. Some of our fire stations, with the new fire stations that are being built, we're looking at removing some of those assets. But at this time, we don't have any major big structures that we're looking at.
Gotcha. I just know there's just looking at that, and I think it was a lot of fire stations that were identified as kind of like the D or the F range. And my goodness, God bless our firefighters for what they do, living in those conditions. But there is potential, I think, for us to take some of those buildings that we can confidently say we're probably not going to renovate. What does it look like for that to be disposed for private investment? My last question is just generally about grants. Are we having follow-up meetings with either the federal government or state government, whoever, to just get an idea of why we are not being selected for these projects?
Yeah, we have Public Works over the last 10 years has secured somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 million in grants. We did not get the mega grant, which was disappointing. We did meet with them and did get that feedback. If Troy, you want to speak to that? Troy did get some feedback from the federal government on that.
Yeah, there were a couple, we went through all the different categories of the grant. We actually did pretty well. There were a couple categories that didn't get our cost ratio, benefit ratio high enough on the Kansas Avenue one for us to make it to the second round. After discussions with them, we found some ways that we can tweak that next time to get that ratio higher. That was one of their big concerns. And then their second concern was we needed greater support from the KCMO side, from the commitment. They gave us a letter, but it wasn't like we did a commitment in a resolution. They needed something to that level. They said would help next time as well. So those were the two big things that they noted, and we're moving forward with that. While I'm talking about grants, the Central Avenue Bridge planning grant that we just submitted, I believe earlier this week, it does have a huge component about the Justice 40. And there's opportunity because of that and where that bridge is at, that we could get the whole design done, or 70% of the design done, plus some of the NEPA work and other things with that bridge at 100% federal government funded because of that. So that's what we're trying to get. Worst case scenario, maybe we may have to spend a little bit, but it's a huge benefit, to your point, Commissioner.
Okay, well, please let us know how we can support, particularly if it's just helping and getting our colleagues. I was just on a panel with two city council women, from KCMO. And so whatever we can do to help support you all to make our applications more competitive, we'll love to do so. Thank you so much, Mayor Pro Tem.
And I think using those relationships, it will be helpful. I know the county administrator worked hard to get to do his part. Mayor's office worked hard, staff did. It just wasn't a high enough priority for him this last year.
Commissioner Kane.
Thank you. I sometimes we have to think outside the box. And I was pretty sure Emmanuel Cleaver said he supported the Kansas Avenue Bridge. I know Sharice Davis did for a fact. She's no longer the rep there. It's Jake LaTurner. So I think we need to bring him in the loop, and Senator Marshall's office is right over here. So I don't think we should just think small. I think we should think big and get as many of the big dogs in helping us. They have earmarks for these kind of things. And I would think that we would think outside the box and pursue those folks, because they're the ones that got the big money. So, and I know that Chuck knows some of the same people that I do. And we could probably set up meetings with some of those folks to sit down and have that conversation about getting some of that monies.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Stakes.
I agree. Those Those partners are important. I know we worked with them on this. And we have, the UG is secured, I'll say somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to $14 million in earmarks over the last few years. So Congresswoman Davids has been a big advocate. And so we've had good success. She is, by the way, her district covers half of that Kansas Avenue Bridge and LaTurner covers the other half. So
Yeah, and I'll also note with the Kansas Avenue Bridge, we did work with KDOT and through the infrastructure hub and secured. If we would have got that grant for the Kansas Avenue, we would have gotten 10 million from the infrastructure hub as well from the state of Kansas. They were awarded it to us if we get the grant to help cover our matching portion. However, when they did we talked to them after we didn't get it. They said what they'll do with that 10 million, since it's been approved already, is roll that over into the program next year. So if we submit for the grant next year and get it, we're very likely to get that same 10 million next year too. So.
yep.
Any other questions, comments? Administrator Johnson, you had anything you wanted to add?
Commissioner Burns.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Commissioner Burns.
Thank you. Jeff, I know I've already spoke to you in private about this, but I think it's very important that you tell your staff that worked during the storms, cleaning our streets and doing the best job that was possible. And other entities in the metropolitan area ought to follow what your guys do. So, and ladies, I'm sure. So if you would just tell them that it is deeply appreciated and not gone unnoticed.
I have, and I'll do it again. Thank you.
Comments?
I guess to conclude, to add some information on this, we had an intense discussion during the last budget process with limitations on revenue. I think we all would like to do more, but we have to be realistic on what we can do. We talked about our level of debt that we've accumulated over decades, and how we do debt management is important. We will be talking about our ability to meet the 25% each year increase in infrastructure. I don't think our revenue stream can support that, particularly when we have to fund all the rest of the departments and their programs and all that. So I want to bring some rationality to our discussion, is that the capital needs are competing against other operational needs. And you'll find those types of discussions over the next 4 or 5 months that Reggie outlined earlier in this presentation. Infrastructure, as articulated by you, to me, is one of the highest priorities of us. It's expensive. And we do participate in grants. They're highly competitive because other cities, counties, and states are applying for those grants. So we are active in that. And and Jeff has told you how well we've done. I also think that there may be a change in the federal approach in the next 3 to 4 years, because we're not in pandemic funding mode where the federal government's going to be throwing out free cash. So we took advantage of that with CARES and ARPA and the infrastructure money, but we don't know how far the federal government will take that investment, because remember, they're operating on a deficit too. And the Fed also just lobbed in the last 3 or 4 weeks. The first time you heard from the Fed, they're concerned about the federal debt level, which means a message to the federal agencies: be cautious about how much more you're going to be asking here. So that's the environment that we're in. We know we have needs, and we're going to strive to meet as many needs as we can. But as we learned in our budget process last year, there's going to be some tough choices on priority setting for us to continue to meet the needs of our citizens. So not to dampen the enthusiasm, but a dose of reality is also important to keep in front of us.
Well, thank you, County Administrator. state and federal grants lower the cost of us doing business, which will frees up dollars for us to put somewhere else. And it's tantamount to asking, and if we don't ask, we don't get. So I do appreciate the comments about the grants. And I'm pleased to hear that the grant conversation is continuing to move forward, and we're seeing staff comply with the commission's requests. One question I have, projects that have been funded or to be funded in the past that haven't gone forward for whatever reason. Maybe they've lost favor, maybe they've lost significance in the CPI projects. What happens to those projects and what happens to those dollars that were set aside for those? Do we have many of those that projects were put in place 5 to 7 years ago that just haven't advanced and gone anywhere?
I don't think we have any projects 5 or 7 years old that haven't went anywhere. Jeff?
Yeah, I can't think of any.
That's good to hear, because I know there have been voices on the commission that worried about having something in the budget, a project, and it wasn't getting funded for a period of time that went into the commission district. So I'm pleased to see that we've continued to push forward those issues, even when the commissioner may not even be a member of the commission any longer. I think it's a testimony to staff to continue to move those projects forward. I don't have any more questions or comments. If anyone else? Seeing none, I believe that. Thank you for the presentation. And we'll wait just a minute before we go into executive session. I'll wait for the individuals to clear the room, and we'll have a reading, and then we're going to go into executive session. Thank you very much. At this time, the commission will go into an executive session for a discussion regarding litigation. Do we have a motion for an executive session?
Pro Tem, Commissioner Bynum, at-large District 1, I move the commission go into executive session until 6:15 PM in the fifth floor conference room to consult with our attorneys and discuss confidential matters related to pending claims and litigation as permitted under Kansas Open Meetings Act, and that David Johnston, County Administrator, Bridget Cobbins, Assistant County Administrator, Angela Lawson, Acting Chief Counsel, Suzanne Bishop, Senior Counsel, and Spencer Lowe, Outside Counsel, be present to participate in the discussion. We reconvene in open session at 6:15 PM here in the fifth floor conference room.
Thank you. Is there a second? We do have a motion and a second. I would ask clerk, please call roll.
Roll call. Burns,
Aye.
Ramirez, Hill,
Aye.
Kane, Lopez,
Aye.
Stites,
Aye.
Davis,
Aye.
Bynum,
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.